And so now you have this situation in the Middle East where we're all being played as pawns, point blank. We're all being played as pawns. This is why I have been stressing to as many people as I can the absolute need for Israel to become militarily self-sufficient, not to be dependent, especially on a country like the United States that has so many ulterior motives at play that people are only dimly aware of, that the best thing to do is to break, just break. And the strange thing about this is that we'll find a lot of other people in our region that would be very happy to join us at that point in breaking our dependence from what's turned out to be a eugenist-oriented West. This is critical.
Welcome to the Tamar Yonah Show on Israel News Talk Radio. Today, Tamar is joined by two distinguished guests. Jonathan Pollard, a former U.S. Navy intelligence analyst who served 30 years in prison for providing classified information to Israel, motivated by his dedication to the security of the Jewish state. Information, by the way, that America should have given Israel as its ally. Now living in Jerusalem, Jonathan is a passionate advocate for Israeli sovereignty. And Francisco Gil-White, a political anthropologist and former professor who focuses on the influence of media and power elites in shaping Western democracies. In today's discussion, Jonathan and Francisco will explore the implications of the recent U.S. presidential election on Israel's security, particularly in relation to its ongoing conflict with Iran and their proxies. With the geopolitical landscape shifting, they'll discuss what these changes mean for Israel and stability of the Middle East. And now, Tamar Yonah.
Thank you, Matt. And hello, Jonathan Pollard and Francisco Gil-White. It's a joy to have you on together. I'm going to start out with, of course, the obvious, the war. Israel was attacked over a year ago on October 7th by the Hamas, and as well the Hezbollah and the head of the octopus, Iran. And this has been the longest war that Israel has ever fought, over a year long. From the beginning, the Biden administration became involved in assisting Israel in this war. So the first question I'm going to throw towards Jonathan is, do you think this was a good thing or a bad thing that America became involved?
I think that when any outside power, especially one that has an interest in the outcome of a war that may not be consistent with its ostensible ally, I think it's terrible that they should get involved at all, apart from performing those acts that are consistent with the alliance that they have. That means in our case, in particular, providing supplies, military supplies, economic assistance, and political help in terms of blocking outside interference, whether it's from the ICC or whether it's from the EU or any other external power. I think in this case, the American influence on this war has been horrific, in the sense that by their interference, both strategically and tactically, they have drawn out this war far longer than what it should have been and could have been. So I guess in conclusion, there are some allies whose assistance and intervention are welcome. And there are others, such as is the case now with the Biden administration, where their involvement has been less than helpful. I'll be diplomatic and put it that way. They've drawn out the war. They have, for the first time ever, made one participant in a conflict, one of the belligerents, actually sustain their enemies, both their, quote, civilians and their armed opponents. I've never seen anything like this in history, ever. And this is a dubious honor for the Biden administration to hold this position. So to answer your question, it's been horrific.
All right. Francisco Gil-White, would you like to comment on what he said? And then I'll ask you something. Oh, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I agree with Jonathan's description of U.S. policy under the Biden administration. What I would add, from my perspective, as you know, I have an unconventional view of geopolitics, and therefore it is often the case that when I am asked a question, I have to dispute the premise. So I'm going to do that now. So you asked me, is it a bad thing for Israel that the U.S. got involved in this war? And I think the problem in the way the question is framed is that it is assuming that the U.S. got involved. But you see, the U.S. is involved. The U.S. is continuously involved in the Middle East because it is very important for the U.S. bosses, the people running the United States state policy, that Israel lose. This is my model. So where Jonathan says it is a weird situation, unprecedented situation to have one's allies supporting one's enemies, I think that apparent paradox is resolved if we simply abandon the fiction that U.S. bosses are allies of Israel. As you know, for many, many years, I've been arguing precisely the contrary. I think U.S. bosses are trying to destroy Israel, but they need to pretend that they are allies of Israel because that's what's politically necessary for them to stay in power in the United States. In other words, if they were openly declared enemies of Israel, that would create a tremendous domestic problem for them within their own country. It would make their hold on power perhaps impossible. And therefore, they have to pretend to be Democrats, pretend to be interested in freedom, pretend to be allies of Israel. And at the same time, they do whatever they can to undermine the security of Israel because they are eugenicists. It's very important to understand that the eugenics movement, which is the movement that spawned German Nazism, had its first great flowering in the aristocracy of the United States and Great Britain. And those people were never removed. It's still their ideology. They're still trying to destroy Israel. And I would add, as a germane tidbit, that our other guest today is, in his own experience, a diagnostic proof of what I'm saying. Because if the U.S. bosses were really allies of Israel, first of all, they would have been sharing the intelligence that Pollard shared with Israel from the beginning, because that's what an ally would do. And after all, and also I believe, if I remember correctly, that in fact the rules for information sharing were the ones that Pollard followed, even if he was not directed to. Whereas the complaint that he had shared that information was actually inconsistent with the agreement that existed. So I think the entire experience of Paul, 30 years in jail. What the hell?
I want to jump in with another question because I think this is what's on the minds of people listening right now. And their question would be, why would the United States be more friendly with Iran or working with Iran against Israel? It sounds almost like a Jewish cabal that the Jews own America, and if America doesn't step up and support Israel, then they're going to go down. So the question is, when you have Iran burning the American flag and screaming death to America, and we see that they're acting against America, they have sleeper cells, etc. Answer this question to our listeners: why they would be with Iran and not Israel?
So is that for me or for Jonathan?
That's for you, but in a nutshell, because I do have more questions for you both.
Okay, so if I can paraphrase your question, is why would U.S. bosses be more allied with Iran than with Israel? Okay. So in a nutshell, you always want me to compress this into a nutshell, but it's very, very hard. But I'll try. I'll try. So Israel is the Jewish state. So the part that really matters there is Jewish. This is what becomes a problem for U.S. bosses. Why? Because Jewish culture is the culture that produced the fight for human brotherhood and equality, right? So the Jewish law, the law of Moses, has its origin, according to tradition, in a slave revolt. So it's no coincidence that the entire body of law is designed so that nobody will be oppressed, so that all the vulnerable people will be protected, so that people will be treated fairly according to ethics, righteousness, and so forth, which is precisely what you expect from a successful slave revolt. I mean, these people were trying to change the system that had been oppressing them. So the entire trajectory of the Jewish people has been to teach us in the West how to fight against oppression. And the consequence of those teachings and that influence on Judeo-Christian civilization has been to move us progressively in the direction of modern democracy. Modern democracy is what the eugenicists are trying to extinguish. And so they created the German Nazis for that purpose. And now they've been supporting international jihadism for the same purpose. It's the same kind of structure. So in World War II, they needed someone. They couldn't do it directly because, again, it's a domestic problem for them. So they needed someone else to destroy the European Jews. To that end, they created the German Nazis. They're doing the same thing all over again. They've been supporting international jihadism in a million ways. We've talked on your show several times about the importance of understanding Iran-Contra, because Iran-Contra was an operation to strengthen Iranian jihadism that had no purpose other than that, because the excuse they gave was a complete lie, right? So, and Iran-Contra is just one example. Pollard can give us many other examples that have been taking place during this war, because he'll be more familiar than I am. But I can give you the whole history of U.S. foreign policy ever since the Iranian jihadi regime was inaugurated. It's all been pro-Iranian. And guess what? The people who created the Iranian regime are PLO Fatah. Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas trained and armed Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas in Lebanon in the 1970s. And it's thanks to them that Ayatollah Khomeini earned his place in history. They're the ones who put him in power in Tehran. And that's the organization that the US insisted should be introduced into militarily strategic territory of the US, of the Israeli state, of the Jewish state, to govern the Arab Muslims and indoctrinate them into a death cult, into an anti-Semitic death cult. That was all the policy of the US bosses.
Jonathan, you agree, disagree?
Oh, I've read Francisco's thesis on this subject, and I don't want to be too glowing about it, but it's one that I share with everybody who's asked me, why in the world are the Americans, or a large number of American decision makers, so pro-Iranian? And I start off with telling them, well, first you have to understand the mindset of the Persians, which are the minority that actually owns Iran right now. Iran is just a series of various minorities, basically overseen by the Persians. And I keep telling them that the name change from Persia to Iran is significant, because it showed that the Iranians wanted to associate with the Aryans, the Germans in Europe, and everything that they stood for with regard to the destruction or the elimination of the Jewish race, to complete basically what Haman from the Purim story attempted to do. Just to give one quick insight, further insight into what Francisco was saying, I was deeply involved with Iran-Contra, and it came from the Israeli side, and it came as a bit of a shock to me to find out just how deeply embedded the pro-Iranian faction in the American government at the time was. Everybody assumes that most of the national security establishment was pro-Iraq because of the Saudi connection. But that isn't the case. There was a very, very, very pronounced pro-Iranian group that was fighting tooth and nail to ensure Iran's victory over the Sunnis in Iraq. This question about why the US would support the Iranians has come up time after time after time whenever I give speeches or podcasts, because it doesn't make sense to people. unless you understand what Francisco was just talking about. You have to go back to square one, to something basic in the appreciation for what Iran stands for with the eugenics. And look, Israel is, for the most part, or should be seen as an outlier in the international community. Because traditionally we were taught that we should be a nation that dwells apart for one reason or another. And certainly ever since the Muslim conquest of the Middle East, we have been even more of an outcast or an outlier. I don't want to say outcast, but an outlier. So I guess the problem with Iran, when people look at it, they think, well, wait, it's a nation of 90 million people or thereabouts. We should be interested in them. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not really a nation of 90 million homogeneous people. It's a hodgepodge, a mosaic, if you will, of various minorities who are eking out an existence under the Persian heel. And to the extent that those people that want to see an end to this Persian domination of Iran would like to see Israel basically take them off the map, the outcome would be very nice, actually, from everybody's standpoint. But again, the bottom line on this whole affair is Israel does have the ability, if it thinks independently, of expanding the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia, if it does everything opposite from what the United States wants. And it doesn't matter if the Republicans or the Democrats are in power. We have to think independently. We have to think as if our collective lives depend on it, because it does. And again, Francisco's thesis is the one where you have to start off thinking about why certain people, particularly in the United States power establishment, want to use Iran to wipe Israel off the map. It goes beyond politics. It goes beyond economics. It's, I would call it kind of a eugenics approach to Middle East diplomacy.
It's ideological. That's what it is.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
what I just said. Okay. So Francisco, explain to our listeners why, or basically who is the head of this conspiracy? Yeah. I mean, you've got the United States, because, people are going to be saying, but the United States was founded on freedom and,
No.
every man is equal, and just
No.
as Judaism preaches, and then we're seeing the leadership there secretly working with Iran. And how do we know that? Just with the war here, that they're always pushing a ceasefire so Israel can never win a war, and they keep the terrorists alive, which are the proxies of Iran, etc. And so explain to everybody who's making the decisions, who's the head.
Well, I think it's less useful to try to figure out who's the biggest kahuna than it is to understand how they operate as a ruling elite and what their values and intentions are. That's what really matters. Not who exactly has the biggest button is not that important to me. So what I try to do in my work, and people can see it in Management of Reality and in my books, what I'm trying to do is trying to show you the continuous line, the continuous ideological line in the power elite of the West. Because see what happened, this is why people need history. If you don't study history, you can't see it. You can't see the pattern. But if you look at what happened in the year 1848, as I always explain, 1848 is the most important year in all of history, because in 1848, the political grammar of the West changed. That's the year in which pretty much every single European people, the same year, rose in revolution and demanded that the modern world be born. And they were demanding parliaments, constitutions, bills of rights, separation of church and state, everything that we consider essential for the reasonable performance of a modern democracy, okay? And it was thanks to those revolutions that the political grammar changed. What do I mean by that? That the people in charge had to change the way they speak in order to stay in power. That's what I mean. They got really scared. They thought their heads were going to be cut off. And so they began saying that they were in favor of the people, of eliminating poverty, of expanding freedoms, blah, blah, blah. They had to change their discourse. And because they did, we were able to push from the bottom and move our societies in the direction of greater freedom and greater equality. But they are hypocrites. They were only pretending to favor democratic change in order to stay in power so that we would not remove them. And in the shadows, ever since 1848, they've been working very hard to corrupt our institutions so that they can destroy democracy from within. And so this is the continuous line in the ruling elite of Western civilization.
I want to insert here. Yeah, one second, Jonathan, because I know that people are thinking, who are they? And when you're fighting a war, don't you have to identify your enemy? It is important to know who's making the decisions. Just like we need to know Nasrallah is the head of Hezbollah. And
right. I don't think they're hiding in secret. I mean, if you want names, these are people like the Rockefellers.
Or the Soros.
The Rockefellers were the great Soros. Absolutely. So certainly Soros. So the Rockefellers in the first half of the 20th century were financing to the hilt the growth and development of the eugenics movement that became German Nazism. And they were sending money to Germany in the 1930s after the Nazis took power to help support the growth of the Nazi movement in Germany.
During the war.
They were sending war material to the Nazis during the war, after the declaration of Pearl Harbor. And after the war, they created the CIA. I'm still talking about the
They're above nationhood, I understand. And we hear about the Bilderbergers and the conspiracy and New World Order
so
and
if
everything.
you want names, I can give you names, but it's not so important to identify who is at the very, very, very top. Although if you ask me to give a name, I would say the Rockefeller family.
Rockefellers.
But it's not that important.
CFR, Carnegie, Ford, and Rockefeller. CFR. Okay.
Yeah. If I could just respond to that. I actually worked for the Trilateral Commission for a while. And whatever Francisco is alluding to, magnify it 100 times. And you have this group of well-heeled individuals who actually are pulling a lot of the strings, not all of them, but enough. But let me just refer back to 1848. There was, as Francisco said, a sea change in Europe with people from France to the German states, to Italy, to Austria-Hungary, to the Netherlands. There was a general uprising asking for civil rights. Well, there was another event that happened in 1848 that I'm a little bit more familiar with, having grown up in Texas. And that was the Mexican-American War. And what that unleashed was the manifest destiny of the American empire, where you have an idea of one people, white, Christian, Protestant for the most part, feeling that it had not just the right, but the religious obligation, as the French called it, the mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission over inferior people. And this is another element that's operating with the eugenists. Why? Because if you look at people like Bill Gates and his mother and father, who were eugenists beyond belief, these people actually believe that the world would be a better place if it were smaller, if there were less people. And this, again, part of it stems back in 1848 with this whole notion of manifest destiny, not so much just of the United States, but of the British Empire and the French Empire and all the other European empires that, like an octopus, spread its tentacles around the world. And so now you have this situation in the Middle East where we're all being played as pawns, point blank. We're all being played as pawns. This is why I have been stressing to as many people as I can the absolute need for Israel to become militarily self-sufficient, not to be dependent, especially on a country like the United States that has so many ulterior motives at play that people are only dimly aware of, that the best thing to do is to break, just break. And the strange thing about this is that we'll find a lot of other people in our region that would be very happy to join us at that point in breaking our dependence from what's turned out to be a eugenist-oriented West. This is critical because the people in power, and I guess people don't like to hear this, but for the sake of just simplicity, the people that are pulling the strings behind the scenes, the people like the Bush family, okay? People don't realize that Vannevar Bush, the Bush's father, was actually indicted and charged for essentially economic treason with the Nazis. It was all about money, but it was more. They'd like you to believe it was about money. So now here with the situation, what is the money? Well, the money is in the Gulf. There's a lot of money there. And people like Trump gravitate to that. This is why all these people saying, you know, he's the Messiah, he's going to liberate us from, you know, our local oppression, you know, from the Iranians and the PLO. And
I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to get there.
So,
I want
the bottom line on this is exactly what Francisco was talking about in Europe, which was suppressed in the counter-revolutions that took place. What happened in 1848 in North America basically gave a tailwind to what eventually became a eugenist movement of the superior people as opposed to the inferior people. And this is what we see playing out now, what eventually played out in the wars of decolonization, and eventually what we have now in the Middle East, where everybody's playing. You have the European Union, you have Russia, you have China, playing everybody here against one another. And the net result is to impoverish us, or the intention is to impoverish us and to drive us into almost a slave-like dependency, especially now on the new Rome, which is the United States.
All right, I'm going to ask a question, and any one of you can feel free to step up and answer it. Where is Prime Minister Netanyahu making mistakes? What does he need to do? What is he doing wrong, and what does he need to do?
Okay, I think that what he is doing wrong and where he might be making mistakes might be completely different questions depending on your model of Netanyahu. So if you believe Netanyahu is an American asset, in other words, that he's an asset of the US bosses that are trying to destroy Israel, then a lot of the things that might seem like mistakes are actually strategically intended by Netanyahu. And that's a hypothesis that needs to be put on the table. As I have argued many times on your show, I consider it diagnostic of who Netanyahu really is, that he is in fact the man responsible for introducing Pilo Fatah into Israel. This is something that most people don't understand. And it's crucial because all of the troubles of Israel stem from the Oslo so-called peace process. So the fact that it was Netanyahu in the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991 with Yitzhak Shamir, the fact that he was there with Shamir and that he was the highest functionary of the Israeli state working for the foreign ministry. He was the undersecretary of the foreign ministry, right? The fact that he was there as the man responsible for breaking the sacred taboo, violating the sacred taboo of Israeli politics, which was that you do not negotiate with the PLO terrorists, right? He violated that taboo for the first time. And from his negotiations with PLO Fatah in Madrid in 1991 stemmed the Oslo negotiations that were signed only 2 years later in 1993 to bring this terrorist organization that specializes in killing Jews, that is descended from the German Nazi final solution, and that is the creator of jihadi Iran into the Jewish state. That's, forgive me, that's not a mistake. If an Israeli leader does that, engineers that, that's an attack on Israel.
So when Netanyahu goes into Rafah, when Biden says no, and when Netanyahu is making plans to attack Iran and doesn't share plans, this is all play acting? Is it all play acting? Go ahead, Jonathan.
Wait. I want to pick up where Francisco left off. I have never trusted Bibi tactically because he has never been able to pull the trigger and do anything decisive of help, of assistance for Israel. Quite the opposite. And you have to ask why that is, because he's a pretty smart guy. Well, there's got to be a reason for inconsistency. And the reason is it's not inconsistent. It's part of a plan. I call Netanyahu part of the Davos crowd. This is, basically the same trilateral Bilderberg group. This is where he really belongs. He is not a Jewish nationalist. He's not religious by any stretch of the imagination. He's not a man of faith. So when you ask yourself, why has he done certain things? The one thing you have to know about Netanyahu is that he is completely controlled by Poles. And if the Poles said in Israel, don't go into Rafah, don't go into Khan Yunis, don't wage a war for total victory over Hamas, then he wouldn't have. But the polling, which in this case was pretty accurate, did not give him really a way out. He was fighting for his political survival. Let's not, mistake it for anything other than that. And he saw this polling indicating that he should take a more aggressive stance, a more decisive stance with regard to the war against Hamas as something that could save him from political oblivion when the next election occurs. I do not trust him further than, I don't trust him at all.
But then who is he listening to, the Poles or Biden?
No, what do you mean the Poles or Biden? The issue with Netanyahu is if he really, really wanted to give Donald Trump what he wants, then he would wage a war right now for total victory over Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, period. And at the end of the day, when Trump walks in, he would be handed 3 Israeli total victories, and he would be thankful, and he would be able, since we're the strong horse now, to bring in the Saudis. But Netanyahu will not take one step without direction, in this case, from the Americans, whether willingly under Trump or unwillingly under Biden. And if you think nailing Nasrallah, giving the word to kill Nasrallah or going into Rafah was a sign of independence on the part of Netanyahu, you're wrong. What it was a sign of political calculation and stemming from desperation. These were things that he knew would resonate well in Israel and that would help him secure another victory come the next election. As far the bottom line with Netanyahu is you're not looking at a Jewish nationalist. In fact, you're not looking at a nationalist at all. All he's doing is looking at his masters in the United States. This is why I call him the little Herod. He is a Herodian figure. And he exists here in the shadow of that ancient King Herod. And he's doing everything Herod would do.
Okay. Francisco Gil-White, is there a difference between Trump and Biden?
So I want to first agree with Jonathan on his diagnosis of Netanyahu. I do have a disagreement with him. I'll get into this in a second, but I do agree strongly with his diagnosis of Netanyahu, and I want to support what he said because Well, obviously, if Netanyahu were a true Jewish patriot, he would have never violated the taboo that existed against speaking to PLO Fatah, number one.
Correct.
I mean, which is an aberration even within his own family context, because his father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, had distinguished himself as someone who tried to get Haj Amin al-Husseini, Arafat's mentor, tried in Nuremberg for war crimes and crimes against
Correct.
humanity. So even within the context of his own family, this is an aberration that can only be explained, in my view, if he is a conscious agent of the U.S. bosses. But I do disagree on Trump. I don't think we should rush to assume that Trump wants an Israeli victory. I think Trump won is inconsistent with that hypothesis. Remember, the first thing he did after assuming office is rush over to kiss King Fahd's hand in Saudi Arabia and to engineer the further sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia, which is already the biggest recipient of U.S. weapons in the entire world. And in that trip, Trump announced that they would get an additional, I don't know, like billions of, at least $1 billion in armament. So I think we need to, and there are many other aspects I could give. He was trying to get a peace agreement signed that would have created a Palestinian state. So I think we have to wait and see, because it is true that Trump is coming in with a team that looked much better than than the team that he started with in his first term. So we need to wait and see. Maybe the rhetoric, maybe there's something to the rhetoric. Maybe this is a revolution. I seriously doubt it. I think this is a very complicated show. Remember, Trump is a reality TV actor, and he's very convincing. And Netanyahu is a great actor, and he convinces lots of people. And the fact that Netanyahu, as soon as Trump was elected president, tried to start making moves towards ending the war in Lebanon, because that's what he did.
Ceasefire.
Yeah, exactly. So that he's taking the first steps to surrender in Lebanon. That's basically what he's doing. And he did that immediately after Trump got elected. And that's a pattern. Here's the pattern, because Israelis need to hear this. There's been a pattern in modern Israeli history where the people on the right pretend to be resisting the Oslo peace process, and especially Netanyahu, because he's the biggest protagonist here. And so when he's campaigning, he's like, "Oh, the peace process is bad. I'm going to roll it back. I'm going to stop it. You'll see. I'll show them." And the minute they elect him, because they elect him on that promise, right? The minute they elect him, he pushes the Oslo process faster. And the way this works psychologically is that Israelis think, oh, well, he's our defender, he's the patriot, so we can trust him to move the peace process forward because he's protecting us. You see, that's how the psychosis works. And now they're doing the same thing. Since Trump is supposed to be pro-Israel, right, and he's the big defender, he's the Moshiach, now that he's in power, Israel is safe again. So Netanyahu, who's on the right and the patriot, right, if he says that it's okay to stop the war in Lebanon, then it must be because both Trump and Netanyahu are pro-Israel, right? So then we can trust them to stop. This is how they this is how they gaslight Israelis.
I must say that when I've debated people concerning Trump's predisposition to support Israel at all costs, I point out three exceptions in his character to this rule. One was after Soleimani's assassination, he allowed an American base to be pulverized by the Iranians without taking any retaliatory action at all. And there were many U.S. servicemen that had brain problems because of that afterwards. The second thing is when a very expensive American drone was shot down over international waters, when the military wanted to retaliate, Trump said no, because there will be Iranian casualties? And I know an awful lot of presidents that wouldn't have even asked that question, let alone be persuaded against a retaliation, because 100 or 50 or however many Iranians would have died. The last thing was Afghanistan. If you really want to understand what Trump is capable of doing, it's a video I saw where he was sitting down opposite the Taliban leadership in Qatar. And he was telling them, I want to withdraw from Afghanistan. If you prevent me from withdrawing by causing me casualties, I will kill you and your families. And here are the pictures of your families and where you live. So let me just leave Afghanistan peacefully, and we can all just get along, more or less. Now, if you take these three examples of what he is capable of doing, I'm sorry. If you have the Gulf states coming to him saying X, Y, or Z, that the Israelis can't apply sovereignty anywhere in the territories, that they have to allow a Palestinian state to be created, that we have to have a ceasefire in Lebanon that does not involve the complete disarmament of Hezbollah, that's what's going to happen. That is exactly. And the problem with Israelis is we're always stabbed in the back worse by people we assume are defending us. We assume are nationalists or assume are, quote, conservative or right wingers. They're the ones that screw us the worst. Look at what Ariel Sharon did in Gaza with the Hitnachut, with the disengagement.
Yeah.
Or even Menachem Begin, for that matter, with Camp David and Yamit. I mean, these were horrific sellouts, but who did it? They did things that the left wouldn't dare do.
Although
Couldn't do.
Defense of Begin, I think in the case of Begin, he was just surrounded by so much pressure that he caved in, because I do think Begin was a patriot.
No, Begin, yeah, as a patriot, but the decision, with the exception of the attack on the Iraqi reactor, a lot of the things that he did under pressure. What?
Who attacked the Iraqi reactor?
Begin.
Yeah.
But it was actually my Air Force base that did that.
Okay. Well, the same thing in a weird kind of way can be said for Ehud Olmert, a man that I have very little good to say about. He went after the reactor on the Euphrates over the objections of George Bush. Okay. There are exceptions. In Begin's case, it wasn't so much an exception because he actually saw a Holocaust-like threat from this, and rightfully so, from this reactor. But as far as Bibi is concerned, I've had discussions with him, and they were not good discussions at all. On this issue, for example, Francisco, of handing Trump 3 victories, the man looked like a deer caught in the headlights when I mentioned this option. And the impression I got from him, and you know the psychology better than I do, is how can I possibly do something like that without permission? That's the look I got.
Yeah.
And right. I said to him, so.
Okay. I'm going to get back to a little bit about what you were saying about the people and about the right wing and how we don't get our way, even though we think we voted them in, etc. But I want to get back first to Trump, because Francisco, you have been saying that basically Trump is the same as Biden. People, though, look at Trump as an outsider coming in to drain the swamp, and on their side, let me just present more evidence what they're thinking, and that is that, look, he wants Mike Huckabee to be the ambassador to Israel. Mike Huckabee is more right-wing, messianic than the Israelis are, and he's got Mark Rubio is also pro-Israel, Pete Hegseth, etc. With a circle like this, people are very optimistic. They think that Trump is going to change things. So,
Yonah, they're blinded by that.
So why would he choose a circle like this around him? If I'm asking for a friend, okay? I'm asking for them. Why would he put a circle around him like this if he were looking to basically oppress Israel, destroy Israel, and have this this,
No, because
this
that's how it
oligarch.
works. So that's
Go
how
ahead.
this psychology works. It's very sophisticated. So you put a bunch of people who seem like allies of Israel in place, and maybe some of them even are. And then what you have the system do is sell Israel out, because
There you go.
now people trust these right-wingers. They're like,
Correct.
well, since these are my allies, the thing they're asking me to do must be the right thing to do. And then
They want the best for me.
That's how they get Israel to bend the knee.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
a good answer.
Yonah, that
Tamar.
point.
Tamar.
Sorry. Tamar, that point that Francisco just made is probably the most important point that Israelis have to keep in mind. The person who is closest to you will surprise you and stab you in the back before you even realize what's happening. If these people who are supposed, as Francisco said, supposed to be the best people in the world for us, tell us, look, we have your best interests at heart. And I'm sorry, but, in order to get an arrangement with the Saudis and have them join the Abraham Accords,
right, that's what they're going
we're
to do.
just going to have to wait for sovereignty in the territories. And we're going to have to grant autonomy plus to the Palestinians who are living there.
But don't worry, we'll give you ironclad guarantees that we're going to defend you.
But that's the point that Francisco is making, is these are the people who are the most dangerous, because they're either, engaged in a double agenda, a multiple agenda, or they're just being used as camouflage right now. This is why I keep saying the most important thing we can do is set our own course. Right now, we shouldn't be waiting for the election to happen. For the inauguration to happen. If we have to defeat Hamas, we go and defeat them. If we have to defeat Hezbollah, we defeat them. If we have to defeat Iran and take them off the map, we do that. If we have to declare sovereignty over our biblical heartland after we've eliminated Iran, fine, we do that. And if somebody like Trump at that point comes to us and says, who gave you permission to do that? You hand him an answer that he can't fight. You say, God gave me the permission. I mean, what is he going to say at that point?
Right. It's literally our God-given right, the land of Israel. It says there right in the Bible, can't get higher than God. All right.
I mean, look, we're living under an illusion that we're an independent state. We aren't. We're still living in exile.
We're a vassal state.
Exile state.
We act like a vassal state, I should say.
Yeah, a vassal state.
Well, can I add something, Tamar?
Yes, quickly, and then I have a question for you.
Okay, very quick. So Jonathan made important points about what Trump did in office that is inconsistent with the idea that he's an ally of Israel. I added one thing, which was the armaments for Saudi Arabia, which is obviously a mortal enemy of Israel. But I'd like to add the point about the things he didn't do, because there were also things that were very easy for Trump to do that he didn't do, and that an ally of Israel would have done. So, for example, Qatar. Qatar has become the greatest financier of international jihadism. Qatar is an indefensible little peninsula of sand, which if it weren't hosting the US's biggest military base in the Middle East, would not exist as an independent country, because Saudi Arabia would eat it up, or Iran would eat it up, or even Kuwait, So the only way that Qatar can exist as an independent country is if Daddy USA is sitting right there with its biggest military base in the Middle East, which means, obviously, to anyone who is not comatose, that the US bosses control the policy of Qatar, which means that Qatar financing international jihadism is the policy of US bosses. And Trump could have stopped that merely by telling them, you know what, I'm going to pack up and leave unless you guys stop supporting international jihadism and you change your foreign policy. You have to change it completely. You have to free all of the slaves that are toiling inside Qatar. You have to free them. There can be no slavery in Qatar. And moreover, you have to close up Al Jazeera. If Trump had started all of that, you do all of this or I'm leaving, Qatar would have to do it. But Trump didn't do that. Also, Trump didn't do another very easy thing, which is from his bully pulpit as the president of the United States, or even just by being Donald Trump, he can inform the entire West, all Israelis and all diaspora Jews about the history of PLO Fatah, about the fact that PLO Fatah has its roots in the German Nazi final solution, because Haj Amin al-Husseini, founding father of the Arab Palestinian movement, creator of al-Fatah, was a co-leader of the Holocaust. And he can tell people about PLO Fatah's responsibility in the creation of jihadi Iran, which is promising to repeat the Holocaust in Israel. But he didn't do it. He hasn't done it. Why? Why isn't he informing about this? The whole world could know.
Could I add something?
Yes.
Wait, there's an important point that substantiates 101% what Francisco is saying right now. Last month, and you can look this up, it's on YouTube, on the internet, everywhere. Donald Trump had a meeting with the Al-Thanis in New York. These are the rulers of Qatar. And they came out and they were all smiling. And Trump was the only one who spoke. And he said, after saying some very nice things about Qatar, which is like saying Germany was a great state because the trains ran on time and they had autobahns. He said, there is no daylight between the Al-Thanis and myself. We see eye to eye on everything. And I sat back and I rewound it. I mean, I wanted to make sure I heard what he said. This is the largest state sponsor of global jihadism.
It's Mordor. It's Mordor. That's what it is.
Correct. And the vile propaganda coming out of Al Jazeera, the Stürmer from Nazi Germany couldn't do any better than what Al Jazeera is doing. And I said to myself, is anybody listening to this? Anybody? And I wrote to many editors-in-chief, Francisco. I sent this tape to a lot of opinion makers and editorialists, et cetera, and nobody responded to me.
Okay.
I asked the question.
Can you send me that footage? I will write an article.
I'll find it. I will find it again. It is absolutely horrific. The chumminess.
Send it to me as well, please.
No, if you look at the body language that Trump had around the Al-Thanis, it spoke volumes. I'll put it that way.
All right. I want to ask another question now, and this is to Francisco. I want to bring this down to the people now. And we see the world is marching with the terrorists against Israel. Why is the world taking the side of evil when it's so obvious what the side of good is?
Because it's not obvious to them.
Correct.
They have been, their minds have been poisoned. So first of all, we are living in a Christian civilization in the West. And that means that for a great many people, the cosmological interpretation that is central to their mystical experience is that the Jews killed God. That doesn't go away just because you say some nice things about Israel. Or
most
because
people are secular today in the West.
Doesn't matter.
It's still there.
Okay.
There is a cultural gravity to this. So if for centuries you were in the privacy of your family, you were exchanging jokes about Jews and gossiping about blood libels, blaming the Jews of supposedly kidnapping Christian children to crucify them in secret and drink their blood and make matzos out of it. And if you've been sharing these kinds of stories for centuries, the fact that you stop going to Sunday school doesn't mean that all of a sudden your prejudices about Jews disappear. To the contrary, you are the recipient of a suspicion that makes you very vulnerable to all kinds of news stories that you start hearing, like they hear in the modern world. So in the modern world, they hear that the Jews supposedly control all of the media, all of the banks, all of the capitalist industries, all of the leftist movements, and the governments of the West. They control everything, right? This is the lies that were spread by the protocols of the elders of Zion. And it doesn't matter that, so people believe it because they'll believe anything bad about the Jews because they already have this poison in their minds. But what's more amazing is that they'll believe it even after it's refuted. So the Holocaust was the dramatic refutation of these lies, because if the Jews had really controlled all of those Western institutions that they supposedly controlled, you would have seen some resistance to the great mass killing of the German Nazis. But what you saw was that all of those institutions that the Jews supposedly clandestinely controlled, in fact, either did nothing or collaborated with the great killing of the European Jewish population. So that was the demonstration that all this stuff about the invisible clandestine Jewish cabal that controls everything and is going to destroy Christian civilization, that was all nonsense, demonstrated by the Holocaust. And yet, after the Holocaust, people are back to believing this. So it is so resistant that no matter how dramatic the demonstration that it's false, people will still believe it. So where we have to put our energy, in my opinion, and this has been my message for many years, is that you have to explain to the Goyim, to the non-Jews, how the anti-Semites have destroyed the lives of non-Jews. This is the message that they need to understand. We have to repeat over and over again. Yes, in World War II, between 5 and 6 million Jews were exterminated. But don't forget, more than 64 million non-Jews also died in World War II. This was
Correct.
Very bad for the non-Jews. The anti-Semites are very bad news for all of us. I'm a non-Jew. I'm fighting anti-Semitism. This is my self-defense. In addition to the more than 64 million dead in World War II, we have to count hundreds of millions who were enslaved by the German Nazis, all of them non-Jews, right? So this is the message. And look at jihadism. We can bring it up to date by talking about jihadism. Look at all the non-Jews suffering as slaves in Qatar. They are slaves. They are bona fide slaves because jihadis make slaves. This is what they do. When they don't kill you, they enslave you. And this is what they want for all of us Westerners. So how do we defend the West? Well, first of all, we defend Israel.
Very well said. Go ahead, Jonathan.
If I could just, when I went to university in 1970, during the Vietnam War, that was the issue. The neocolonial issue made by certain people like Frantz Fanon, the Wretched of the Earth, and people like that, was something that we studied only because it was important, because of the anti-colonial movements that were just really coming into their own at the time. So it was an attempt to understand where they were coming from. Over time, this concern with the anti-colonial movement became an oppressor-victim relationship. This is where we had, I know at least in Stanford, we had the first evidence of these psychologists getting involved in trying to make people understand victimology and who were the victimizers. And that eventually morphed over the succeeding 30 or some years, where the Jews were seen as part of the oppressors. So it's a black and white world. And what we have right now, what we see at the universities, is a red-green alliance, where the objective of the victimhood objective of the leftists, of the so-called woke progressives, where they always have to have a victim and they always have to have an oppressor, are merging now, or has merged, with the Islamo-fascist movement. Because the Islamo-fascist movement has a victim and they have the oppressor. So it's a very easy fit for the Reds right now. Now, when I've argued against.
But it's not, I'm sorry, let me just interrupt for a second, Jonathan. It's not really an easy fit because the jihadists are oppressors. They oppress even the Muslims.
But they
So
don't
the
know
only
these
way they can
kids.
make it work is
These
with identity
kids.
politics. So
Yes,
what
but
they
these.
say is the Muslims are brown, right? The Arabs are brown, and therefore, and they were once colonized by Europeans, so that makes them the good guys. And that's the only way they can square that circle.
But the point is, when you talk to kids, as I'm sure you have, I have never seen a more uneducated or de-educated group of kids in my life. They don't know history. They don't know ethnic, what I call ethnic psychology. There's a whole field. They don't know it. And what's worse is they're totally resistant to understanding the truth in history. They don't want to hear it. So when you have these brown, seemingly oppressed people coming to them with kafiyas and saying that white colonialist, genocidal, apartheid oppressor is the guilty party in this whole lot, they don't even want to think. There's no critical thinking anymore. None.
And so you have two movements that are diametrically opposed, but what binds them together is anti-Semitism. And so now they're buddies in order to get at us. I have a question that I think is really important.
Wait, one thing, Tamar.
Okay, finish.
How could you otherwise explain gays for Palestine?
Right.
Okay, I just want to leave that thought.
Absolutely. All right. So now you've presented the case that basically we are being all duped and played by the puppeteers, and they have us thinking that there's different sides, but they're basically working together. Am I right so far? Is that what you've been saying? More or less? More or less. Okay. So now seeing that the governments that people are under today, whether they are under lackluster and weak leaders, or worse, sold out, treasonous, people in a conspiracy, and they hold the power over us, even if they are weak leaders, but they still hold the power. What are the people to do? What are we to do? We know all this. You've given us information. What are we to do?
Well, I mean, I think that the very first thing that we need to do right now is share information, because it's very difficult to get any kind of political outcome when people don't know what they need to know. Mm-hmm. So not to defend Trump, because I don't, but I'm certainly very happy that Kamala lost, because Trump's victory, even if I don't trust him as a person, is still a win for the culture wars, right? It's still a defeat for woke. And the reason that that was possible was that so many people are not consuming legacy media now, and are now very, very steeped into alternative media, where, you know, alternative media has its own problems, but at least there's much less censorship there. So you can find all kinds of views represented, and make up your own mind about what is being said, instead of simply being spoon-fed some propaganda designed by a heavy Orwellian state, right? So we can use these alternative media, such as Tamar and many other people who are bravely, staking out a channel on their own, right? And inform. So we have to share this information. We have to look, what I think is critical, and I've said this for 20 years and I haven't changed my mind. I think it is critical for people to know the history of Pilo Fatah, because when you know the history of Pilo Fatah, when you understand that what the US bosses did was introduce the German Nazis and the Iranian jihadis into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, once you understand that, you understand the entire system. There's only one model of the system that is consistent with that, which is that US bosses are trying to destroy Israel.
Okay, but as Jonathan said, young people today don't know how to think, don't want to think. So putting them aside, since they're not going to be the answer, they're just like zombies. The rest of us people who are awake, not woke, but awake. What are we to do to fix the problem? Go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the things we have to remember is we can change governments. At least so far, we're able to change governments. What we have to do is understand that it's not so much the government we change, but the thinking of the government that we have to change. When I spoke before a very large, angry crowd of people in Lud, following a horrible pigua, a horrible terrorist attack that occurred nearby, I heard a lot of people yelling and screaming and complaining about the government. Okay. So I asked them, how many of you have voted the same way from the moment you actually could vote? How many of you have done that? And almost everybody put their hands up. And I said, well, let me introduce you to a thought that Albert Einstein articulated, and that is, one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So I said, what you have to do in the next election is be smart and elect somebody who not only represents something different from what you've been voting into office over your entire mature lifetime, but who will promise and execute to rip up the deep state on day one. That's the key thing. You can have wonderful people elected to office, like Begin. But his greatest mistake, in my humble opinion, was that he did not rip up the deep state when he had the mandate to do so.
Yeah.
Could have done it. And right now, in this next election, may be the last opportunity we have here in this country to elect people who will not only promise to rip up the deep state, but will actually carry through with that promise.
When is that going to be, John?
Pardon?
When is the next election going to be?
Well,
it could be in 2025, or it could happen before then. If Netanyahu is now going back into court, we don't know what could happen there. We don't know about the budget, what will happen there. We don't know what will happen with the Haredi draft.
He can call early elections if he feels strong enough.
Or desperate enough.
Well, that's what the left wants, is early elections. They want to topple the government. And I find it ironic that they're screaming and yelling that Bibi changed the defense minister when we're in the middle of a war, but they want to change the entire government while we're in the middle of a war, which may be good, may not be good, but I'm just saying it's what's good for the goose is.
To support what Jonathan said. So Jonathan said a true patriot would just fire everybody who is collaborating with the U.S. bosses, right? Just fire them all. And he's absolutely right. And of course, Netanyahu has never done that.
Ever.
I heard an interview with Jonathan just recently, where he was speaking to someone else, a guy with a huge beard also. I can't remember who it was.
Rabbi David Bar Chaim.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the points that Jonathan made was that Israel Katz has been put in an impossible situation. And I think that's true. In other words, Katz
I think he's just a yes man for Bibi, that Bibi's really the defense minister and Katz just is good. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Could be because whatever your interpretation about that relationship, what is definitely true is that the only thing that happened is that they replaced the defense minister. The entire rot remains.
It's still there.
And so how can Israel Katz, even assuming he's the true patriot that Israel needs, even assuming that, in terms of his personality, he obviously is not going to have the tools to do much because the entire infrastructure remains in place.
Correct.
All right.
That's the problem when you elect people who promise change, but who either don't have the ability or the willingness to actually rip the deep state out by the roots. Because we are the revolutionaries, actually. And it's the progressive woke eugenists who are actually the statists. They're the ones actually oppressing.
That's the establishment.
The establishment. We're the revolutionaries. We're the rebels who are saying, no, we need freedom. No,
we're also the majority. We're also the majority.
Yes.
And as the left is wont to say, the majority is free to think whatever they want as long as we agree with it.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying to put new people into office, but there are no new people. It's the same recycled politicians all the time.
Maybe.
So Jonathan, who would you vote for?
I'm trying to change some of that right now. So,
Halavai. What about this idea? We're stuck with these politicians, so maybe use them to do our will. In other words, turn the tables. Instead of us doing their will, that we force them to do our will. No? Doesn't go? Never go?
That requires a change in the political grammar, and the change in the political grammar will not happen unless everybody knows the stuff that they need to know. This is why sharing information right now is so important. But I still think Jonathan is right. Even when you change the political grammar, you have to go the further step of getting rid of them. And this is not necessarily violence. This just means you have to fire them. They have to be out of office so that they don't undermine the patriotic goals in shadowy ways from the government. They need to be out. And I've said this for many years. I'm going to say it again. I think modern Western democracies need a constitutional amendment that says that for the government to spend even 1 cent of the people's money in secret is unconstitutional. Because the minute you allow that, they create clandestine services that are used by the bosses to destroy democracy. Every single cent of the people's money must be audited by the people. And the only way to preserve democracy is to make these constitutional changes. I hope that if Western democracy survives this current test, that will be the outcome. That we will have
believe it or not, that's one of the purposes of Musk being appointed to this government efficiency.
I don't believe it.
Well, I'm just saying that is one of the ostensible reasons for his being appointed to that.
No, I don't think so, Jonathan.
What do you believe Musk's job is in this circle? What do you believe his role is?
Of course he is.
He's certainly a complicated figure, but I think that if it were really true that Musk is going to eliminate clandestine operations, then that would really be Tulsi Gabbard's job. I mean, she's the one being appointed as director of the CIA. So
national intelligence, director of national.
Okay, but still, that would be her job. So not Musk. Musk is supposed to be fixing efficiency, like getting rid of waste and stuff.
He had said that he wants to make sure that people understand where every cent goes. Good luck.
Yes, but they never mean. But there's always an exception, except for the secret stuff that the U.S. intelligence does, obviously. So they're talking about no waste. They're not talking about freedom. They're not talking about basic democratic rights of the people versus their government. So no, if Trump were really okay, the thing that would really convince me that Trump is for real is that he announces not merely that he's going to protect free speech, but that he's going to eliminate clandestine operations, that he's going to work for a constitutional amendment that makes it illegal for the U.S. government to spend even 1 cent that is not fully audited and made public to the people.
Do you know what would happen? Do you know what would happen? No. Do you know what would happen? The next assassin will be very successful.
No, I disagree. I don't think that's true. I think that's how they sell us on the idea of clandestine operations. They tell us, oh, we have to do all this stuff in secret to protect you.
Oh, no, that isn't the point. That isn't the point. It's basically what happened to Kennedy. When you push
I think Kennedy was assassinated by clandestine operations from the CIA.
Exactly.
It's because the CIA exists.
That's what Jonathan is saying. That if he were to do that, they would take Trump out.
That's what I'm saying. I agree with you 100%.
Oh, I see.
I agree.
If he were to announce that, they would take him out. Is what you're
Oh
saying.
my
So
God!
then you are
Look,
leaving room that
look,
Trump is
wait.
maybe
I
not
used to
with
work.
this cabal.
I
That's
used
what you're
I
saying.
I'm
used to
saying
work
we
with
will
the.
see. We will. So
I
I
used
will
to.
judge him by his works.
Okay.
I will judge him by his works.
All right.
Okay. So I'd like to end this conversation that we're having with, now that people have watched it, what is your call to action? I mean, it's very nice. We had a very nice conversation. What do they do now?
Make this video viral. Make viral the information that explains to everyone what PLO Fatah really is. People need to understand that the Nazis are inside Israel. The German Nazis are inside Israel. The Iranian jihadis are inside Israel, and they are powerful with the Israeli government.
So
This
Bibi
needs to
doesn't
be
want to take out
explained.
the nuclear reactors from Iran? Is that what you're saying?
Of course not. Bibi has been, as Jonathan said, Bibi has been doing the minimum that he needs to do to survive as a politician in Israel.
Correct.
That's what he's been doing. But if he could have, he would have negotiated on day one with Hamas to stop the war and get the hostages
Correct.
back. He would have done
Correct.
day one. He's the one who negotiated for Gilad Shalit, which is the reason that we had October 7th. Yahya Sinwar and his buddies were released in that ridiculous negotiation. That was done by Bibi Netanyahu. So,
Correct.
I mean, we know who he is. Come on.
Okay, so share the video, make it viral. Jonathan, what do you suggest?
The other suggestion that I have is that for people to remember that we do have an ability to get rid of this rot. But whereas people have been calling for judicial reform, which this current government ran on, that party platform, since I came home 4 years ago, I've been calling for military reform. And most people that I've talked to about this are in agreement that the number one priority in the next government, apart from generally ripping up the deep state, is to effect military reform by cleaning out basically everybody in the high command in the military.
You have to find them all.
I have to keep focusing people on constructive things, Francesco, because
I think
the people here are very, the deep state is very careful to listen to people and to basically come down on them with a ton of bricks. So I'll give you a quick example. There was an incident in the territories where a yishuv, a settlement, a legal quote unquote settlement, was overrun by the police, security services, and the army. And the people there fought back with stones and bricks, and they hurt a bunch of soldiers. Okay.
It's the wrong.
I was very careful when I commented about this to say, do not raise your hand against your brother. Why? Because if I hadn't said that, there would be a knock at the door.
Right.
I've already been threatened. Believe this. I've already been threatened because of what.
But it's also true. But it's also true that that's the wrong move. We can't have a civil war in Israel because a civil war is a gift to the enemies of Israel.
I agree, because it plays into the hands of the puppet masters at that. But they say, you see, this is what
that's what they want. That's what they want.
That's what they want.
That's what the whole judicial reform circus was about. It was to try to produce a civil war.
Correct.
Or to keep control of and keep power.
So my bottom line with people is vote for people who you hope will be able to act on their promise to rip out the deep state by the roots. What other option do we have? Get educated.
Who do you like? Who are you voting for?
I'm voting for Jonathan.
Can I wait? I gotta tell Fred.
Are you running?
Maybe, probably.
This is where we take the people and we make them do what we want.
Wait. I have to tell Francisco and Yonah, I have to tell you something funny. Before the last election, I was giving a speech before about 900 women. And I've never been more scared in my life about what I was saying and what the reaction would be. Okay. And these were extraordinarily well-educated, nationalist women. And at the end, about 40 or 50 of them surrounded me and said, you talk a lot about the type of person we should vote for, but you never told us an individual.
Ooh.
You never identified an individual. Tell us, who do you think we should vote for? And my small staff that was with me were turning 3 shades of red, waving me off, saying, don't get involved.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
And I said, ladies, I learned one very important thing from my wife, Esther, Alea Shalom, may she rest in peace. And that is never tell a woman what to do. I got a lot of booze at that point, but I extricated myself from that.
Well, who could I vote for? It was a poetic out.
It was a poetic out.
You know what they say?
No, there are people.
The man is the head of the house, but the woman, she's the neck. She turns him any way she wants.
Absolutely. No, there are people I could vote for. People like Amira Vivi, people like Ofer Winter.
There are a lot of good people.
There are Sima Hassan. There are lots of good people that will do the right thing here. But people have to vote for them. I'm sorry. That's it.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, we'll end it here. I'll weigh in with my 2 cents that yes, we need to do the footwork. We need to do the efforts. And then God, our creator, the creator of the universe, he controls the results. But we need to do the footwork, and we need to pray also to God because he controls everything. And he should, God willing, give us the redemption soon. But again, we need to make the efforts. That's on our part. Francisco Gil-White, Jonathan Pollard, thank you very much. Very stimulating conversation, and may it be good. And again, as they say, please spread this video, make it viral, because we little people are the only hope, not the cabal, not the people who are puppeteering. Thank you so much, both of you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Francisco. Adios.
Bye.
Special thanks also to Matt Zucker for producing this show. Hey everyone, to make sure you can get access to all of our interviews, make sure to hit the subscribe button on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. Your click makes us all stronger. Thanks.